What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio is world-renowned psychic Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everybody. Tonight we get to speak about two things we really love, music and the paranormal world. Tonight we're speaking with Matthew Swayne, who is a journalist currently working as a research writer at Penn State. He's also worked as a reporter and music reviewer for several newspapers and online outlets such as CenturyDaily.com and Music.com.
He's also a regular contributor to the recently revitalized version of Omni magazine called Omni Reboot. He writes the Antimatter column, which looks at fringe science and the paranormal.
He's also worked on writing projects with Paranormal State's Elfie Music. Matt uses his experience in journalism, ghost lore, and the paranormal to collect and tell stories about the supernatural, which is why he's written a book titled Ghost of Country Music. Please help us welcome Matt Swayne to Truth Be Told.
Welcome, Matt.
Hello.
How you doing, sir?
Not bad. How are you doing?
I'm good. Well, you know, Eddie is from North Carolina. I'm from Kansas. I feel like I should start bringing my accent back because we're going to go down south and have some country music, good old-fashioned good
but
time.
Is that your accent or is that my accent?
Well, no, that's your accent.
That's what I thought. He's like, I need to go back to the Midwest and be talking like I'm from the South.
I know.
So where are you from, Matt? Where are you at now?
I'm from central Pennsylvania, born and raised here.
Mm-hmm.
I thought you were going to say from New York City.
Yeah, so it's kind of the northeast, right?
Well, I like to consider State College the New York City of central Pennsylvania. So.
Hey, look at you.
Well, what we like to do is, before we get into our journey of your books and your research, we like to get to know who Matt is and where he grew up, and we know that. But did you have any experiences growing up, like Eddie and I did, growing up having our own paranormal ghost encounters? So can you tell us your story?
Well, that's an interesting question because, you know, I was born on Halloween, so I've always say that I've have experiences, but I've always been interested in paranormal encounters, and I always loved ghost stories and horror movies. I've had a couple what I would consider weird occurrences. I used to live in a apartment building, and it was actually an old house converted into an apartment building. And I've had several things happen during my stay there. Doors would close overnight that I knew I had opened. The television at least once or twice turned on without, me activating the remote control or anything like that. But I also have sort of a scientific mind too. Well, I don't know whether I have a scientific mind, but I always try to explain things rationally, and I could come up with rational explanations for them. So I'm not completely convinced they were paranormal, but I'm not completely convinced that there isn't something to it. So that's kind of how I stand on that.
And when you look back at that experience today, did you go back and find out what the history of the house was, or did you ask other people who were tenants in the building if they had any similar experiences?
I did look into the history of the house, and the house was actually once a doctor's office. And I don't know why I felt this, but I always felt that there was a female presence, almost like a nurse. In fact, the one time, this is kind of a super weird story, but I came home from work and my bed was made. And I can give you any number of witnesses, my mom, my wife, who will tell you I'm not the most dependable in that department. But I felt like it was a nurturing nurse spirit. So, I did look into it at that point. Now, about 2 years ago, I'm from a small town called Tyrone, Pennsylvania, and one of my friends, who I really never talked to anybody about this except maybe my wife. My friend posted something about this. I think he called it the lady. The lady came last night or something like that, and then was mentioning this in a store in a kind of a cross post about ghosts. So I reached out to him, and he lived in the same apartment. He was living in the same apartment that I was living in, and he was experiencing the same kind of weird phenomena. And the fact that he always called it a female ghost added to the mystery of it. So, I really consider myself a skeptic in the purest sense that I really don't know, but I have an open mind to it. I don't consider myself a cynic. I don't consider myself a total believer, only because I have people that I trust a lot who have had experiences that have really changed their lives, and have gone from probably where I'm at to being more open and believing, almost completely believing.
Wow.
I love that.
And no, what I love what you're saying, and what I love working with Eddie, and I'm just gonna give him a little kudos here. Before you said nurse, Eddie, because he is a psychic, he's very talented psychic. He actually wrote down caregiver.
Wow.
And then you said nurse, and he held it up and showed it to me. I'm like, I'm so used to that with Eddie. Did you ever have you had an opportunity to work with psychic or a medium in your research?
I have not. I mean, I've interviewed plenty of them. A lot of my books really are based on, when I first started to write these things, I pretty much looked at accounts that were already written. There is just something more believable about someone who is going to go to a newspaper reporter or a television reporter and say, this is what I experienced. But I don't want to be too much of a clinician when I write these things. So I've lately, a happy medium, no pun intended, for me is to go out and reach out to paranormal researchers, mediums, and those folks. And I use them for these stories a lot of times when I can.
Well, this is great. I listen, I love this stuff. Eddie loves this stuff. That's why this time of year is one of our favorites, and we dedicate usually October to just all paranormal. But we want to thank everybody that's tuning in for the first time on Periscope. We want to thank you, and if you have any questions, ask them. We'd love to pass that along to our guests.
Ask Matt.
And then, of course, Facebook and UBN Radio. Well, Matt, so we want to get to your books. So you have two amazing books, one about rock and roll and one about country music. This, we all love both. Well, not everybody loves country. I mean,
Right.
I like the country they play now, Matt, because back when I was growing up in North Kakalaki, it all sounded like
Texas.
Sounded like dying cows in a hailstorm.
But
I hate to say that, but that's my kind of favorite type of country.
Yeah,
okay.
Really
I do
the
like old school. I
Okay.
like old school.
And the
actually.
interview's over. Bye.
No.
Okay, that was quick.
Yeah. But I grew up. My father.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. My father, Ernest Tubbs and Hank Williams Sr. and all those.
Charlie Pride,
all that
Tammy
stuff.
Wynette.
But we've always heard about in the South. We talked about this earlier about some of the most haunted places are from the South. From the Civil Wars to old plantations and Grand Ole Opry
And the slave trade.
Slave trade. So, but what makes country music so haunted, or just country music? Why are you writing about country music and hauntings and ghosts about country music?
That's the fascinating part about this. And just to give you a little background on how I approached it, I had written a lot about university ghost stories. I work at a university. I was a reporter near a university, so I had opportunity to collect a lot of those ghost stories. But then I decided, to get into rock and roll. I figured, you got a lot of, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There's big lives. Wouldn't there be some kind of spiritual activity to it? And in fact, there were tons of stories about either rock stars who were ghosts, who saw ghosts, who investigated ghosts, and of course, there's a lot of curses in rock and roll, and a lot of strange supernatural paranormal events. And so, I guess my research question at that was what makes rock and roll so haunted? But then I started finding some of these country stories, and I looked into that, and I started to gather material for this book, which is coming out in February. And what I found was that it might not just be rock and roll or country. I think there is something inherently spiritual about music in itself that creates sort of this supernatural, maybe an affinity for the supernatural, and it's certainly a spiritual awareness. So you take that natural awareness of spiritual things, and then you add onto it the cultural, the religious. When you go down south, I mean, the religion is very strong. Spiritual beliefs are very strong. So I think that all comes out in sort of in a different way in this belief in the paranormal and the supernatural. I think it's really at its heart, music is a grasping for transcendence, and I think that's kind of what these stories illustrate. And hopefully some of them do it in a kind of creepy, interesting fashion is what I'm always trying to do.
Oh, absolutely. And my grandma would say, Mama saw a ghost on the back porch. I saw the ghost on the front porch during a rainstorm. And Mama said to her mama, she's like, Mama, you've got company. And then he sort of walked through the door.
Wow.
And Grandma had her back to the back door and didn't even look up, still doing the dishes or whatever. And she said, oh, that's old man, da-da-da, don't bother him, and he won't bother you.
Wow.
And it's a Southern trait for sure, but I think the South was a much simpler way of life than most other parts of the country for a long time. So, we're going to go out in the woods and we're going to get us something to eat, and we're going to get some herbs, and we're going to haul the water in from the well, as it were, for decades or centuries. But we're not simple people, but we can take things back to simplistic ways. And I think that's one of the ways we have access to the world that you're talking about. I love your hypothesis about music being a frequency or a vortex or a portal or a way to pick up that energy or draw them to you. I think that is fascinating.
Very
I think
fascinating.
you're onto something big there. So who are some of country music's biggest spirit celebrities?
I looked at, when I looked at this, I looked at country music celebrities who were ghosts or reportedly were ghosts. I looked at country musicians who were very into ghosts and the paranormal. And then I found sort of surprisingly one or two that were both now. But when you look at the most haunted country celebrities, you definitely have Hank Williams there. Patsy Cline's there. Loretta Lynn, thankfully, is still with us.
Yes.
But she definitely is probably one of the most spiritually, supernaturally, paranormally aware people that I know. I found just reams of her stories that go back to when she's a kid.
Yeah.
So those are some of the celebrities there. The guy that I really enjoyed about, though, was Johnny Cash, because I found that he wasn't actually there are people who say they've run into the ghost of Johnny Cash, but also Johnny Cash was really into spiritualism and contacting spirits.
I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. Here's my thought on that. Johnny Cash lost his brother when he was little.
Yep.
And I feel like, similar to Abraham Lincoln's wife, was that Mary Todd? When you lose a child or you lose a sibling that close, and it affects you for the rest of your life, you're dying to know if there's really a spirit world where they can come back. So what was Johnny Cash's drive towards spirituality, in your opinion, Matt?
Well, I think that was the incident that started that, and I think that caused those deep existential questions for Johnny Cash about his brother and about life after death. But and I think musically, I think he was always he was drawing from that in a lot of his songs. Johnny Cash, to me, and now that I've written the book and I listen to him again, even when he was young, he was an old soul. You can just kind of feel it. And the interesting thing that I found is that, Christianity plays a major role in country music. Country music really grew out of gospel, and some of the Irish and Scottish music traditions. But one thing you find about Johnny Cash is that he leaned more towards spiritualism. And at one point in his life, he met a man who I find very fascinating, and I write about him in the book. I don't have a lot of information about him. He's pretty mysterious, but his name was Bernard Ricks, and Bernard Ricks was a medium who communed with spirits. And there was sort of three people. There was Johnny Horton, there was Johnny Cash, and there was Merle Kilgore, who was a country music songwriter. And all three of those formed this kind of spiritual bond with Bernard Ricks, who almost to me was almost like a guru to them. And of course, Johnny Horton died tragically in a car crash. That haunted Johnny Cash quite a bit because right before he died, Johnny Horton had tried to reach out to him and called collect, and maybe Johnny Cash didn't have any cash at the time, so he did not accept the call, and he felt guilty. So when they went to the funeral, Johnny Cash was sitting behind Ricks and noticed that he was writing in a tablet. Now, earlier that day, he had talked to Merle Kilgore and had mentioned some Bible verses, and it also said, someday we'll understand this and everything will be as bright as day. And after the funeral, Johnny Cash asked Merle Ricks what he wrote, and he wrote "bright as the day" or something very similar. So Johnny looked at that as a sign that his friend had reached out.
Now I'm going to ask about because I know June, his wife, June Carter Cash, and his wife were, very, very spiritually connected. And do you, with his spirit being known after now, his ghost, I guess if we want to say, now because they were so close, does June anybody ever seen June's ghost? Because you would think she would be like, Johnny, come on over.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that apparently, according to some, has happened. Johnny Cash had a home in Jamaica called Cinnamon Hill, and Johnny writes about vacationing there and living there. It was kind of a place for them to get away from it all. He and June, and in his biography, he writes about seeing a ghost. In fact, a bunch of people, and this is when as a journalist I start to pay attention, because when you have a lot of people, a lot of witnesses, it adds to the credibility. And according to Cash in his autobiography, they were having a dinner party, a few people, 5 or 6 people, and they watched a woman come through this dining room door, past the group, and then exit right through a door. And he writes about it fairly nonchalantly, and he said that there were a lot of ghosts in this mansion in Cinnamon Hill. Later, after he died and after June died, there have been investigators who've stayed there, and I think it is a hotel or a bed and breakfast or something like that now. But they said they've collected EVPs from both Johnny Cash and June. So it looks like they're together again.
Oh.
You know what I love about this story is they were interested in this at a time where, especially from the South, you do not go out and announce it to the world that you're doing it, number one. And number two, they were really looking on a deeper level for the contact or a greater meaning in life or whatever. And like you said earlier, Matt, through music, even though he's not singing about it specifically, the message is sort of woven through the cracks, if you will.
Right.
And I I feel like now they're breaking through from the other side to continue the work that they were quietly doing when they were alive and making it come back around full circle.
That's great. Wow.
Yeah, very well could be.
Do you also feel like Patsy Cline, she was bigger than life, as it were, and she had a couple of near-death experiences, I believe. And I think one of them was a fatal car crash where she almost died.
Yeah,
and oftentimes people who were in accidents like that, they end up developing a connection to the non-physical world in a way that most of the rest of us don't. Do you think that was part of her interest or connection to the spirit realm? Or you tell us something that we don't know because we're excited.
That's absolutely the case. And I didn't know that a lot of people were aware of this, but in fact, she was in 2 very serious crashes prior to the fatal plane crash. And before the fatal plane crash, I picked this up in a lot of my research, is that she became very fatalistic, but in a somewhat good sense, that she was at peace with this. And I think it was to Loretta Lynn who she told Loretta Lynn that third is going to be the charm. She wasn't going to make it past the third one, and of course then she perishes in that plane crash. Patsy Cline. One thing that I look at and that has kind of risen to the surface as I've written a few of these books is the bigger than life personality. And Patsy Cline, I don't. Whether you like country music or not, I mean, you just have to appreciate the wonderful voice that she had.
Yeah, she had a great voice.
She just had a huge personality, and that's what came through as I was researching about her, about how, country music at that time was very much a good old boys club, and she could not care less. She was in the bars drinking with them, making fun of them, and was really one of the guys at that point. And they all talk about how vivacious she was. So it does seem to be a connection between these big personalities, celebrities, and then these ghost stories, because there are several ghost stories about her haunting the Ryman Auditorium. They see her there. They see her in Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, which was a famous watering hole, still there for country music stars and up-and-comers back in the day. And the other story that I found was that her I guess she called it her dream house, and sadly she just sort of moved into it right before she died. But it's somewhat modest compared to the big mansions that country music stars have today. But later, this owner was complaining about things like the fireplace turning on spontaneously, and then he heard this click clack across the floors that sounded like high heels, and of course, Patsy was known for that. So she's apparently out there too.
Wow. What I love, this is just my little thing. Ever since I was turned on to Patsy Cline back in the day, I always felt like her last lifetime or 2 or 3 or 4, she was just a man. And and this lifetime, when she came in this lifetime, she comes through with so much of that gregarious male energy and this beautiful voluptuous body with this angelic voice. Mm-hmm. And I also find that people like you just described who come back and they're bigger than life, as it were, it seems like those souls come back to live 4 or 5 lifetimes in a very, very short span.
Mm-hmm. Well, she certainly did it.
Wow. Oh, yes, she did. She did. I mean, go ahead.
Well, there's one of the sort of side ghost stories is that, and I think it's in Tootsie's, where people hear the word hoss, and apparently that was her pet name for everyone.
Oh, how funny.
So I think it's kind of cool.
I love that. What were you going to say, Tony?
No, I was going to ask one of my dad's favorite, and so I grew up on all these people, like I'm sure you guys did, but one of my dad's favorite was Hank Williams. Mm. And so his son's still around, grandson's performing. So
he always seemed tortured to me.
yeah,
Hank.
all of them kind of did.
Yeah.
Like Johnny Cash,
Well,
even though he was an
Mhm.
old soul, but he was a tortured old soul. And same with Hank Williams. Because you see him on camera, you see him, during
Yeah.
their career, but behind the scenes,
Right.
they're so much tortured life.
But guess what? Not now,
Right.
but there was a time, Matt, and maybe you can help
Mhm.
back this up as a journalist and an author of this information. Country music was the number one music people listened to
Oh,
to
yeah.
commit
Oh, yeah.
suicide.
Oh, to commit, I didn't
Yeah.
know that, but
I mean, it was the number one thing that's
Yeah.
like, well, hell, I might as well just put on some Loretta Lynn and just check out. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
Hank Williams.
But no, I want to know a little bit more about his story too, because his name lives on through his not only his music but his his offspring. So could you tell us a little bit more about where his ghost has been seen
Sure.
that'd be great to hear from.
And don't say it's at Loretta Lynn's house because I'll be like, what's going on there, Loretta?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you might find Patsy there. They were such close friends, but I don't think Hank's there. Hank his name comes up in so many places that are associated with country music, and his spirit seems to appear there. He is really kind of the king of haunted country music.
Really?
And one of the more fascinating, maybe macabre stories of country music is his famous death ride. And this was a comedy, maybe a comedy or a tragedy comedy of errors that happened when he was traveling from, I believe it was from Alabama or maybe Nashville to a gig in Ohio, and he had maybe 2 or 3 days to get there. At the time, Hank was addicted to drugs and alcohol, but I do want to kind of clear up some things about Hank, because I before I wrote this book, I thought he was just kind of a hellraiser, but it turns out that he may have had a form of spina bifida, and he was in a lot of pain.
Oh wow.
Kind of continually, and as a kid and as an adult, and you can even see it now that I've read some of those accounts. When he is singing, he does sort of look a little twisted. And anyways, he was prescribed prescription pain medicine, and it just sort of spiraled from there. But this ride started in the South, and they traveled to Knoxville and tried to take a plane, and then they got kicked off the plane. Some people say it was because he was rowdy. Other people say it was because of weather. But in any event, they went to this hotel, and then they traveled the next day the whole way up to West Virginia, where he perished in the parking lot of a gas station in the car, and no one even really knew that he died. The driver didn't know. Apparently, someone came up to him and said, "Did you know this guy's dead behind there?" So it was a very macabre story. But what I found is those ghost stories kind of trail along with him. There's a ghost associated with the hotel he stayed in. There's a ghost associated with the area where he died, or at least where they found his body. There are ghost stories all up and down his death ride, but there are also ghost stories about him appearing on stage in the Ryman Auditorium, and he's with Patsy at Tootsie's apparently too. And there are a lot of very cool stories, ghost stories about him.
Why do you think, and Eddie, I'll ask you this too, why do you think someone like Hank, where their spirit, their ghost are in so many places, and where sometimes spirits are just in one location, like their house that they grew up in, a house that they lived in,
or the hospital where they died.
Or a hospital where they died.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think his spirit is in so many places?
I would like to hear Eddie's opinion on that. I have two, and the one I've already discussed is I just think the personality is so big. And what I am finding more and more in this, and trying to approach this as a open-minded person, open-minded skeptic, what
Mm-hmm.
I'm finding is there is a correlation between the fans' desire to see the spirit and the manifestation of the spirit, or at least these ghost stories. So the materialist scientist side of me says that it's just because they want to see someone that they love so much, and they don't want to let go of that. The other side of me says maybe there is something to the consciousness reality kind of model of reality. So that's just me talking, though. I'd love to hear what Eddie has to say.
Well, I'm in the same vein of thought as you are, Matt. When Michael Jackson died, CNN reached out to me and a couple of my colleagues, and the reason they reached out is not to, quote, get a hold of the spirit of Michael Jackson. It was they were genuinely trying to figure out why the world was grieving. And in my mind, I'm like, why is that a question? Here's why the world is grieving. We grew up with Michael Jackson.
Right.
And his music was very leading edge. It changed every decade of music that he was alive. And music is the great transcender of frequency. You can go back to the African Americans whenever they were slaves. The thing that kept them from being so heavy in their burdens was gospel, was spirituals. And then how did African American people start making it in the music industry? What were they doing? They were singing. So they were breaking down the barriers. They were breaking down the color lines. And then the frequency of that pure intention goes out and affects the hearts, the minds, and the souls of other people. So just like Hank Williams, just like Michael Jackson, when you think of Michael, you think and feel the music that influenced you the most at a certain point in your life. And it's the same with Hank Williams. Thank you. Now, what my guides just said is this. Hank did have some tortured aspects or tormented aspects of himself as a human being, as all humans do. And his was amplified by the spinal injury, if you will. So he had these two distinct personalities, the one where he was on the stage and he's delivering his heart's purpose, his soul's purpose on the earth plane. And newsflash, when you're doing that, guess what? Your back doesn't hurt. Your mind doesn't hurt. You're not brokenhearted about something. You're giving out to the people. So you're giving them the purest aspect of yourself in that moment from a soul perspective. When you step off stage, just like with comedians, when they step off stage and the applause is over and you get in that car by yourself and you're driving to the next gig, that's when your shit comes laying back on top of you. And then, so it's a duplicitous kind of experience. But why I think Hank is on all of those locations from where he passed away to where he started out especially, and then the places he haunted when he was alive, is he is continuing to transcend the frequency through his music. I really feel that way.
But do you think, and what goes back to you, Matt, the longer he's been dead, and people that really don't know his music anymore, because I guarantee you, I can ask many millennials, and you'll say, "Do you know Hank Williams Sr.?" And they'll be like, "Who?" Is his spirit being seen less and less, or ghosts seeing less and less?
Or are they seeing him and they like, who dat?
Yeah, or who that?
Yeah.
Well, that certainly could be. The interesting thing about these ghost stories, and there is a level of this ghost story that is, I consider, ghost lore, and that is it. The ghost stories become folklore, and the folklore lives on. So it is really hard to tell when these ghost stories, whether people are actually encountering a ghost and then releasing that report or giving that account, or whether they're simply retelling one for a while. So it's hard to tell what era this is. But one of the best things that anyone's really ever said to me about my books, I had one millennial tell me that they didn't believe in ghosts, but they loved the book because they learned so much history. And so sometimes this ghost lore becomes, there's a lot of reasons we tell ghost story. There's a lot of reasons for why we tell ghost stories. And some of them are obvious because they're ghost accounts and they're experiences that are transcendent, and we want
Right.
to, and they're weird, and we want to talk about it. But there's another level to this that we're really trying to pass on history. We're passing on customs. We're passing on caution. And so sometimes when you look at someone like Hank Williams, you think maybe we're going to retell these stories because of, it's almost like a cautionary tale because we know of Hank the Hellraiser and we don't want to emulate him. So maybe that's how these stories get embedded. And the other thing that I think about Hank is that he just really was a kind of a haunted person.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right about this kind of twin soul thing that he had because I came up, I read a lot about that when I was researching about how, he was constantly missing gigs because he was too drunk or, he overslept or any number of those things. But they wanted him back because he was, one, such a talent. But they also knew Hank as the kind soul and the good person that he was. So you really nailed that.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate that. While you're speaking, the other thing that came to me, and I knew this consciously, but I haven't thought about it this way until this conversation, and that is we all know that music is a conduit, period.
Mm-hmm.
And what we spoke about at CNN when Michael passed is it doesn't matter where Michael's non-physical essence is now because his physical essence isn't here. But when he's out in the universe doing whatever his soul is doing, every song somebody sings, every song somebody plays that was his or his family's or anything that he was directly associated with on the earth plane triggers orbs of light and connection from the earth plane out into the universe that are specifically Michael Jackson. And I feel the same thing with Hank. And not only is music a conduit, but why do people go to the Grand Ole Opry? Why do they go to concerts? They all pack in there for one reason only, and that is to feel good based on music being a conduit that lifts the heart, the mind, and the soul. And he was a healer. He was a great healer of people because he was looking for a way to heal himself. And I find great people like him or people who achieve greatness on the earth plane, especially in the music industry, they are more sensitive than an average man. They're more empathic than the average man. And so most men that sensitive, who you're born and raised in a time where men are not to be sensitive, they're supposed to be men, don't cry. And then here he is, this vehicle of sensitivity, empathic, creative, artistic genius, and he's in pain. And I think people could feel that and feel like, oh my God, he's suffering and somehow he's getting through it. His music is vibrating to me and through me. So maybe it will help heal me too, as it were. I don't think they're thinking that consciously, but they're definitely feeling the essence of the intention behind the product.
Wow.
That's
pretty deep.
It's also important to note that if you can name one spiritual system, one religion that doesn't use music, I was hard pressed to think of any, but chanting, rhythmic drumming, organ fugues, hymns, the list goes on, chanting, singing prayers, all of those things, music becomes such a part of that. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When you talk about Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, these are people of destiny too.
Yes.
So you definitely get the feeling there too that destiny doesn't for a lot of fans end when that person passes away.
I am very interested to know the answer to this question. In your interviewing and your journalistic work and all of that, how many people did you come across that knew, let's say, the Elvises and the Johnny Cashes and the Hank Williams of the world and the Patsy Clines? How many of them in their friendships and partnerships when they were alive were told by these legends today, these icons, that they always knew since they were little kids that they were destined for something big or great in this way? I would be curious to know the answer to that question.
There, in my research, I will tell you that Elvis, from the get-go, and I actually talked to someone. And let me tell you about my experience with Elvis, because I'm not a ghost hunter. I'm not a paranormal researcher. I think the hours are really terrible that you're mucking about a house at like 3 a.m. I don't think I could do that. But when I was in Memphis and I toured Graceland and I, walked those streets and I went to Sun Records, if Elvis would have came up and tapped me on the shoulder, it wouldn't have surprised me.
Yeah.
You really feel that spirit there, and so I just talked to someone recently who told me that her one friend's father was a street musician the same time Elvis was starting up, and he said that you just knew he was going to be not just great, but beyond great. That there was something about him that man of destiny came up. And, I also get that impression with Hank Williams. I get that impression with Patsy Cline, that there was just something about them, something magnetic, something powerful. And that charisma, is it that we are reacting to the charisma that we saw on stage years ago, or is there something there that continues? That's the question.
That's such a great question. I feel like it's something obviously that continues where it leaves off.
Right.
Because there's certain people that have star energy. And I'm not saying celebrity star, but it can lead to that. When you're in human form, and you start doing the things your soul called you forth to do, then doors and windows start to open for you. Your life gets easier when you start doing what your soul's calling is. And every time you cut yourself off from that, then you start falling into the tortured piece of it a little bit. The more you continue to follow what your purpose is, the brighter your light shines. And what other humans are responding to is that soul's light shining so big and bright and bold inside of that person.
And I think, being here in Hollywood, being in the entertainment industry like we are, that I think a lot of people go towards their purpose, but other people, other entities around you get involved and they start making it their purpose. And that's where I think a lot of people get tortured, because they can't sing what they want. They can't do what they want. They can't go in the direction they were meant to go.
They can.
They can, but
they start to believe they can't without this machine behind them.
Because the money that's being put behind them, it's like, I'm going to get this success. They do, but unfortunately, it's not what their destiny would.
Yeah, they get wrapped up, I think, in the physical human minutia instead of remembering what their soul's light was here to bring them. What's your perspective on that, Matt?
Well, what you both are really talking about is one of the key stories of rock and roll ghost lore, which is the Crossroads.
Oh,
and
what was
that
again?
Are you familiar?
Yeah, the Crossroads.
Oh, Crossroads. Okay.
The Crossroads goes back to Robert Johnson, they call him the grandfather of rock and roll, because he was a blues guitarist in the Mississippi Delta. I think, in 1920, so it was way before. Right, kind of trace the roots of rock and roll to him, but he was a young African American male in the South, and basically had two options: either work the field or be a blues guitar player. And he wanted to be a blues guitar player, and he saw that there was a certain esteem. There were lots of women, lots of wine following these guys around. So he decided he was going to be a blues guitar player. The only thing that held him back is he was not great. He was not a good guitar player. And there are actually, this isn't folklore at this point. This is really historical, because a lot of those musicians at the time then wrote about meeting Robert Johnson and saying he was a mediocre at best guitar player. And what happened was the circle of really good blues musicians pushed him out. And for a year, he disappears from the historical record. No one really knows where he went. And then he came back, And not only was he a great guitar player, able to play what the blues musicians could play, but he had developed his own intricate style that brought the crowds, the women, the wine, and everything with it. And he became really regionally famous. And it didn't take long for those blues musicians to start speculate that there's a legend in the Delta that if you want fame and fortune, you go to the Crossroads at midnight, and a man dressed all in black will show up and offer you a contract. You sign the contract. He tunes the guitar. You get to become a rock star or a blues star, and he gets your soul. And Robert Johnson, a few years later, dies mysteriously, dies in a lot of pain, howling like a dog, they said. So the legend continues that was the devil coming back to collect on that contract.
Oh,
But
wow.
what I see and what you guys talked about is that is the journey of a lot of musicians.
Mm-hmm.
They
Whitney
try to break it into
Houston.
the mainstream.
Yeah.
They get kicked out. They develop their own style. They get embraced, and all of these things come with it. So it becomes a lot of different levels, because I've talked to ghost hunters who've been in that area and who say how mysterious, if not cursed, it is. So there's that level. Then there's this level of folklore that these stories, the story of the Crossroads is like a lot of European myths, a lot of African American myths, and then you have this level that it's a cautionary tale, and all the rock stars will talk about selling their soul, and that's what they're referring to.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, look at some of the people just in the last few years: Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston. I mean, all kind of went down the same path when it comes to the bigness of their success. I mean,
Right.
and then end up all of them passing away.
And then there's one other element here that I just want to tack on, and that is Whitney Houston was bisexual and was with a female lover for years until she became famous, and then that needed to stop. So there are other aspects, I think, sensitive people like who we're talking about right now, who have these other heart, soul felt desires to fulfill that they came here to experience, but then they can't have that either on top of the other things that they're experiencing, as it were. You've been
Interesting.
You are fascinating to talk to, Matt.
And please, we're just really getting started, and we'd love to have you back and talk more about the rock and roll, haunted rock and roll, because there's so much more, and people in the chat room have been asking questions. In fact, I was getting ready to ask, because he was asking about Elvis, and then you kind of touched on it. So
what project are you working on now? What's next in your?
Well, I've done rock and roll. I've done country. Everyone wants me to do maybe jazz or folk. I don't know, but I've actually found some interesting stories about World War II, and I have an interest in history. So, kind of how this up, things that I want to research and then try to find maybe kind of a supernatural twist. So I am looking into those, and I've also been interested in reading about Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather was somewhat of an exorcist at the time, in the Puritan time. So I found some actual cases he's worked on, and maybe I'll turn that into something.
Well, that's
going to be good. Now, I would read that book during the day.
Okay.
Well, again, we thank you so much for being here. This is Matt Swayne, and just do you have a website that people can go to?
I do. You can access me at mattswayne.com, MATTSWAYNE. I'm not great on self-promotion, so that to me sounds very narcissistic. But people told me to do it, so there it is.
Well, and we're glad that you're doing it, because there are a lot of people interested, and you're giving great content. And so we've been pronouncing your last name wrong the whole time.
That's okay.
I was going to say you were so kind to not correct us.
But here's the thing. What we did was we pulled up a couple of interviews that you had done in the past, and they called you Sweeney. So we were like, is it Swayne or Sweeney? We're like, dang.
Yeah. Can I have a real quick
go for
story
it.
about that?
Yes.
My wife at the time was just I just got engaged and decided to take my name, and my parents took us out to eat, and the waitress said, "Table of 4 for swine," and so she still took the name, but that's okay.
That's hilarious.
And then you to be born on Halloween on top of that,
Right,
it's
right.
like, oh, that's hysterical.
Yeah, the poor woman.
Poor woman. I'm sure you guys are both happily married, and she's probably glad she did.
Well,
so.
I bet so.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much. Matt Swayne.
Yes.
And we'll talk to you soon. All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, another great show, Eddie. I'm so excited that we have these amazing guests on. We've learned so much.
Yeah. And I'm just sitting here, like, my head's still, like, whirling around. Like, I want to know more about Loretta Lynn.
I know. I wanted to get on
always
them.
felt she was,
yeah.
like, and, you know, they just barely touched on it in A Coal Miner's Daughter.
Well, I actually watched a couple of documentaries at her. What's the name of her?
Something. I know what you're talking
Coal Miner's Daughter.
Rolling something Hill. Hurricane Mills.
But I've heard, Confederate soldiers, ghosts are there. Women, like a woman is there.
Yeah.
I think her husband is there.
Yes.
Her son that got killed.
That drowned.
Mm-hmm. So
she predicted that, by the way.
Yeah, she did. I think she's psychic.
Oh,
I
she's
mean,
totally psychic.
yeah,
That's
I
why
would
I
love to
always
talk
just
to her.
loved her.
We
I
should
always
try
felt
to
like
get her on the show.
Dolly Parton is very psychic, in my opinion, as well.
Is she?
I think so.
I would love to try to get Loretta and say, we don't have to talk about your music. Let's talk about, because she loves talking about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that, and what are you working on?
Well,
And let's talk about your latest album and what's this really about.
Yeah, but we want to thank you guys always for tuning in. We hope you guys subscribe to us on our YouTube channel and iHeartRadio, iTunes, all that stuff. I have a little thing going out that it's going to tell you anyway. But we want to thank you for tuning in. Next week, we have a live seance. We're going to try this again. Try it.
Yeah, I'm feeling really good about this one.
Yeah, me too.
Now, the other people did extraordinary jobs. We're not being catty or anything like that, but this is different.
Traditional. It's more traditional.
You took the words out of my mouth. This one's more traditional. The lights are going to be low. We'll have some candles, and yeah, we're excited. You never know.
You never know who's going to show up.
Did she give us homework? Like, do we need to
will.
start talking? Well, not the day of.
Oh no, I'll ask her.
Ask her if there's anything she wants us to prepare, because whenever people come to me, and I'm not good with dead people, but when they come to me, I say in advance, please make sure you ask them to show up at that date and time, and blah blah blah.
Well, we want to thank you guys. We want to see you next week right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor,
and we're out of here. See you later. Hey, I'm going to do that.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie right here on ubnradio.com, Channel 1. Make sure you go to the iTunes channel and subscribe there to the show. Listen to us on iHeartRadio, and don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel, which is Truth Be Told. That's the Truth Be Told page on the YouTube channel. Check us out there. We've got lots of videos, lots of podcasts, and lots of things where we're probably acting silly. So every Friday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on ubnradio.com. Check Tony and I out on Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie.